Dr. Duke Pesta received his MA, Master of Arts in Renaissance Literature from John Carroll University, and his PhD in Shakespeare and Renaissance Literature from Purdue University. He has taught at major research institutions and small liberal arts colleges on a wide variety of subjects as a graduate and also in the undergraduate level, including courses on Shakespeare, Renaissance literature, the Bible, Russian literature, and one of my favorite authors, C.S. Lewis. Dr. Pesta, his experiences include educational reformer, university professor, high school teacher, and administrator of an online curriculum. He is currently a professor of English at the University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh, and the academic director of Freedom Project Education. Please give Dr. Pesta a warm Minnesota welcome.
I do want to thank you all very, very much for being here. I appreciate that. Just a quick note, a little bit more about me. I've given over 300 Common Core talks in 40 different states now. I've testified before, I think, 14 state legislatures. I've talked to about 40 Roman Catholic bishops and hundreds of priests. Many of the Catholic schools have taken Common Core. And I've actually written some standards myself. I helped write some standards for the state of Texas, so I have experience with that kind of thinking as well. So, explaining Common Core the way it needs to be explained requires about 6 hours. I'm not going to do that to you. I'm going to try in an hour to hit the highlights, right, and give you a solid sense of what the issues are. I always like to say at the beginning of these talks, Common Core is a hugely bipartisan problem. This is not a Democrat issue. This is not a Republican issue. In my mind, this is a political class versus the rest of us issue. All right, and that includes many Republicans and many Democrats. This is a statist class versus us class. Those who believe that the federal government should be not just more involved, but ultimately supremely involved, only involved in how our schools at the local and state level work. We're not there yet, but Common Core is a huge step, one that we wouldn't be able to reverse in that direction. So you'll hear me reference various politicians because politicians and educators are behind this. I will reference them. You'll see them from both sides of the aisle here. I just want to make that very clear. Also like to insist upon making this point at the beginning. As a 22-year teacher, I think Common Core is bad for teachers. So this is not in any way, shape, or form an anti-teacher talk, even if you're a teacher who likes Common Core. Even if you're a teacher who thinks it's good. You didn't ask for this, number one. And number two, if you don't like it, you have no say in getting out of it. And the simple fact, in 40 different states now, I've had tens of thousands of teachers write me and tell me, we would speak out against Common Core if we were not threatened at the state level for doing so. Those teachers who support Common Core are encouraged to tell you why. Those that don't really don't dare do it because of the trouble they'll get. This was implemented at the state level in most states. The state superintendents of schools, the superintendents, the principals have all told their teachers, this is here, there's nothing you can do. I had one teacher tell me just 2 days ago, she told me, we were told by our principal, you have every right to free speech. You have every right to oppose Common Core, but you do not have a right to do it while working at this school. Okay? And I'd like to suggest to you that any system like this that requires that from teachers, does not let teachers, who are the first contacts between our kids and education, any system that requires that of its teachers should be viewed with suspicion right from the get-go. All right, having said that, let's do the down and dirty here. And I will read, I know it's a little hard to read. Common Core, let's just talk about what it is. Common Core is an abbreviated term. It is used to refer to the Common Core State Standards Initiative, a set of national standards for English and mathematics, with science guidelines now, science standards now quietly being fed into the curriculum across the country. Interesting. Math and English were the first two. And math and English had to more or less be approved by somebody in a state that took it. They're now feeding the subsequent standards without asking states. Now that states took English and math, they're just putting the others in without telling anybody. That's important too. Oh, and by the way, this is illegal. 3 federal statutes from 1965 prohibit your federal government from creating national standards or a national curriculum. Legally, the feds can't do it. I don't know why it's taken this long. Well, I do know why, because the states that took Common Core received hundreds of millions of dollars to do so. That's why. But we now finally have our first governor, Governor Bobby Jindal in Louisiana, who is actually suing the federal government because this violates clearly those prohibitions at the national level from doing this. And I'll prove that to you before we're done. One more thing I would like to say to you. Every piece of information you're going to see moving forward is documented and sourced. You can have them. When I'm done with this talk, you can get a business card from me or my colleague Dave Drake back there. You email me, I will send you this whole slide presentation for free. Because you should have the information. And you should check on me. You don't know me from Adam. But when you do that, and in 300 talks, no one has ever written back to me and said that's not true. You find something, let me know. But when you verify what I'm telling you, then I beg you to hold to the same standards the people who are telling you it's going to work. The people who are telling you it's benign, it's innocent. Just hold them to that standard. Ask them to show you how they know that. They won't do it because they can't. But all of this information is sourced and you can have it. They call them the state standards, which is interesting because that leads you to believe the states wrote them. And the reason they tell you the states wrote them is because the 2 Washington lobbyist groups who put the standards together, one of them is called the National Governors Association. 2 Washington lobbyist groups, the NGA, the National Governors Association, and the CCSSO, the Council of Chief State School Officers, these are the 2 organizations that were paid to craft and draft and produce the standards. Now, when you hear the phrase National Governors Association, it's very tempting to think, hey, 50 state governors locked themselves in a room and banged out education standards. I wish that had happened, but ask yourself this. What qualifies your governor to write education standards? What qualifies my governor to write education standards? I've got Scott Walker, right? Arguably the most conservative governor in the country. He couldn't write an education standard. So why do I wish they had done it? Because you can unelect a governor. The people who did this, you can't get rid of them. In fact, here's your copyright for Common Core. The standards, the educational standards that are transforming American education, they are not owned by the states. They're not owned by governors. They're not owned by teachers or teachers' unions. They're not owned by the Department of Education. This entire scheme is owned and copyrighted by 2 private entities that have never been elected to anything, that are completely off the grid. And Minnesota, if you decide you don't like the English standards, and I got news for you. You can comfort yourself with the fact that you didn't formally take the math standards, but Common Core math is in your schools. It is across your districts already. How do you get at these people if you don't like it? This is what I refer to as Banana Republic stuff. Public education belongs to the people. How in the world, to an unelected group committee, most of whom have minimal educational experience, how did they be able to craft something this big? There's your copyright. But I'm here to tell you, the copyright is just a red herring. The federal government knew it couldn't do this. It wanted to do that. So it let these 2 lobbyist groups take the heat. I'll explain and document that in a moment. Let me just put to rest the idea that the governors did this. Do you know who the governor who was the chair of the National Governors Association for most of the time Common Core was being implemented? That was Governor Mary Fallin of Oklahoma. And about a year ago, 8 months ago, Mary Fallin pulled Oklahoma completely out of Common Core and basically said the states weren't consulted. It was not state-led, the states weren't consulted. And this was the woman who was the chair of the NGA at the time and the governor of Oklahoma. Right? Back to this. Common Core is, so they call it state standards. Right? Big government types, the political class, whenever they roll these things out, whenever the government cedes more of your responsibilities to itself, it always puts a pretty name on it. With all due respect, does anybody actually believe the Affordable Care Act is going to be affordable? But they gave it a great name, didn't they? Right? And that's the same thing here. They call them state standards, but what evidence do you have? So how did we get it then? So, okay, it's copyrighted by these 2 Washington lobbyist groups, the NGA and the CCSSO. Well, who paid for it? They were backed and funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. As you sit here today, Bill Gates has spent $6 billion on Common Core. Advertising, promoting it. There's not a single major educational organization in this country that actually supports Common Core that wasn't paid to do so by Bill Gates. The National PTA took millions of dollars of grants from Bill Gates to start advertising Common Core before the standards were even written. Why did 170 Roman Catholic diocese schools take Common Core the first year they were able without even being asked to? Well, could it be that the NCEA, the National Catholic Education Association, the watchdog for Catholic kids, they received hundreds of thousands of dollars in grants from Bill and Melinda Gates? The National Chamber of Commerce, who supports it. That's why so many people who would identify themselves as conservative think this is a good idea, because the National Chamber wants it. The National Chambers received millions and millions from Gates to push this. Bill Bennett, former Secretary of Education under Ronald Reagan, came out supporting the standards, only to be forced to admit on national TV 2 days ago that he's being paid to promote the standards. You see what I mean about how this worked? $6 billion. And may I humbly ask you, what in the world is Bill Gates' educational experience? Isn't this the guy that dropped out of college because it was absolutely a waste of his time and became a tremendous entrepreneur? More power to him. But what qualifies this guy to be involved up to the earlobes in what your kids learn in the classroom? Right? Think about this. Do you honestly believe we would have taken this? Do you honestly believe, Minnesota, the state of Minnesota, your newspapers in this state, your liberal establishment in this state, do you honestly think they would have accepted this if instead of Bill and Melinda Gates, it was the evil Koch brothers who ponied up $6 billion? What do you think the Minneapolis newspapers would say every day of the week if it was Koch's billions instead of Gates? What allows a private entity like this to completely transform American education without any representation from you? That's part of the problem. Okay, so everything you've said so far, Pesta, suggests that a lot of people did this, but not the federal government. So where's the federal government tie? Here it is. How many of you remember the Race to the Top program? You may recall back in 2009 when President Obama was stimulating things like banks and car companies. They also siphoned off over $500 million initially, and ultimately, as we sit here today, multiple billions of dollars. They set it aside for a race to the top. It was a big federal giveaway. President Obama, Arne Duncan, the Secretary of Education, called it a stimulus for education. And what they did is they gave billions and billions of dollars away to the states by way of an application process. I'll give you an example. In 2009, New York became the first state in the union to accept Common Core, to accept a Race to the Top grant. They received $700 million directly from the federal government. That money went directly to New York State Department of Education, and they could spend it any way they wanted to. Do you know what the only proviso was for any state that took Race to the Top money? Any state that signed on for Race to the Top money, and over 40 of them did, those states were obligated to accept Common Core when it was finally written. That's how 44 states in the union got it, sight unseen, simply because they took money from the federal government through that giveaway that was Race to the Top. So in other words, your federal government bribed most states in the union to take a set of curriculum standards that nobody in those states had seen. And in many instances, about 22 instances, the standards weren't even written yet when 22 states signed up for them. Nobody, by the way, disputes this. When they tell you this is state-led, please ask them how they know that. And there's no doubt that after states, and when you took the English standards, there's no doubt after Minnesota took the English standards, there's no doubt that a very small percentage, statistically insignificant, of Minnesota teachers may have been able to look them over. But your state had already taken them. Your teachers couldn't change anything. They couldn't reject them. They weren't given any power to amend anything. This is how it happened in 46 states in the union. That's where you are. And that's why it's federal. Because the only entity on earth that can put this into your schools is the federal government. Do you honestly believe if it were the evil Koch brothers? Do you honestly believe the Department of Education would have allowed this? This could only have gotten into all these schools because the feds wanted it there. There's no other way. Oh, and how do I know that's true? Have you seen what the federal government is doing to states that want to pull out? Threatening to withhold their entire education budget. I'll show you a slide in a few minutes. 2 days ago, the federal government threatened Illinois because the city of Chicago, President Obama's own backyard, one of the most progressive school districts in the country, they decided they were only going to use these ridiculous tests for 10% of their kids. They were only going to use the Common Core national tests for 10% of their kids and let the other 90 escape them. And for that, the federal government of the United States, and I'll prove it to you in a moment, blackmailed them. You don't use our tests, we will withhold $1 billion from your federal education budget. So the feds blackmail states bribe states to take it, and are now blackmailing states that want out of it. Call it what it is. Even if you like the standards, call them what they are. This is federal. Bill Gates, for all his billions, could not have bought this into your classrooms. Only through the cooperation of the federal government did this happen. I mentioned the copyright for you, and that should just blow you away, right? I mean, you'll see very quickly, the copyright is indemnification. It's how they cover their butts. When you say this is federal, they point to this and say it's not. I think this is even more shocking. The fact that they allow the copyright to be held for that very reason by people you have no access to, no control over. Let's start with the beginning. Now, I got to tell you, I've been doing this for 2 years now. I'd much rather be home with my wife and my dogs. But the problem is that you keep hearing the same repeated lies about Common Core. That it's state-led, that it's governors-led, that teachers did this. None of it's true. And no one ever asked them to prove it. I'm going to prove to you why it's not true. But I decided to do something novel. Because the only real argument, then there are thousands of activists. You've got really good ones working in this room for Minnesota. There are thousands of activists across the country fighting this. University professors, and we're not talking about tinfoil hat-wearing conservatives. We're talking about educators, teachers, right? Philosophers, education specialists. My point about right-wing conservatives is, tinfoil hat wearers is, the only meaningful argument I have ever received for all this information is you must be a teabagging right-winger. That's how they handle this. Anybody who disagrees is a tinfoil hat-wearing Republican. That's it. That's all they say. And it's shocking, isn't it, in our culture, how much that works for so many people. All right, so I decided to do something. I'm going to make the case against Common Core exclusively from Democrats and progressives. How about that? Let's give the lie to that, shall we? That it's only benighted Tea Partiers that oppose Common Core. What you're going to see for the remainder of the day all comes from exclusively progressive, liberal, and left-wing sources, all of it. Oh, I could take up a week of your time with conservative critiques. I could take up a week of your time with Christian critiques of this stuff. But let's just leave it with the left. It's a weird world we live in where the letter in front of your name determines your veracity, right? Okay, let's let them do it for us, okay? So we start with, how about the two chief lawyers at the Department of Education when this was being proposed? The two lawyers that the Department of Education hired to make sure they were being constitutionally legal, they said it wasn't, all right? With respect to the race to the top Common Core scheme, Robert S. Eitel and Kent D. Talbert, former Deputy General Counsel and General Counsel, respectively, of the U.S. Department of Education, concluded that, quote, these standards and the tests will ultimately direct the course of elementary and secondary study in most states across the union, running the risk that states become little more than administrative agents for a nationalized K-12 program. That's the two lawyers. You understand? You don't get to be the top lawyer at the Department of Justice if you are a tinfoil hat-wearing right-winger. Not Justice, I should say, Department of Education. That doesn't happen. That's what they said. And the title of the document was The Road to a National Curriculum, which you can find online, their whole analysis of the illegality of this. How about, all right, I'm an English professor, so words are my business. I'm going to give you 5 words. I want you to help me. I'm going to give you 5 words, and you tell me if there's any way you can turn these words into conservative. You ready? New York State Teachers Union. I'll wait. Because this is 1 year ago. You should know that there are 3 states in the union that got Common Core very early: New York, Florida, and Kentucky. They were the test states. They've had it a lot longer than you. They've had 2 full years of testing, Minnesota, when some of your kids will just get theirs in the spring. It's been a disaster. The New York State Teachers Union, after taking $700 million, now wants out and wants the man who brought it to the state fired. This is from January of last year. The Board of New York Teachers Union on Saturday unanimously voted to withdraw support for the Common Core state standards as they are being implemented, and they declared no confidence in the state's education commissioner. The New York State United Teachers, a union that represents more than 600,000 educational professionals in the state, is also asking the State Board of Regents to terminate State Education Commissioner John King Jr. And although the union previously backed the benchmarks, the union says it will not support them either as implemented or interpreted. Not the way you wrote them and not if you try to fix them. Get rid of them. All right? There's your tinfoil hat wearers. The entire teachers union in New York, because why? They've seen it. Look, and don't get me wrong, the left and the right don't always have the same things in mind when they oppose this. You can see one of the problems for the teachers unions, right? One of the points that we've been making for years. The teachers union have now realized that when this thing becomes fully federalized, they won't have control of their teachers anymore. They will not be able to get them raises or keep their jobs. If this does get fully federalized, they're losing their control, not just you moms and dads. But you know what they say, right? You take your allies where you find them. How about this? How about the NEA? How about the National Education Association? How about the largest teachers union in the country? And arguably, now that the UAW's been hamstrung, the most powerful politically activist union in the country. These are the guys, the NEA, who sent $150 million of their taxpayers' dues into Wisconsin to unseat Governor Walker. That's how they're spending your money, teachers. This is the NEA. Again, you cannot pigeonhole them as a right-wing group. And here's what they said, note the date, 1 year ago in February. The nation's largest teachers union is pulling back on its once enthusiastic support for Common Core, labeling the rollout, quote, completely botched, unquote. NEA Association President Dennis Van Rokel said, quote, the standards will not succeed without a major course correction, including rewriting the standards and revising the related tests with teacher input. Yes, you heard me. The tests that your teachers and kids are going to be evaluated by, they weren't written by teachers. Teachers don't get to grade them. You know, your teachers will not even get the specific results of their kids' tests. How are you're going to give these kids these tests, and you're not going to let the teachers see how their kids did on them. How is this going to improve your child's education? And that's the NEA, right, telling you that. Matter of fact, Dennis Van Rokel is no longer president. He is now unelected, and they elected a woman who ran on a reversing Common Core platform to head the NEA. And I should also say, too, the second thing that makes these tests, that makes this all national, is the tests. Your kids have to take a national test now. Do you know there are over 50 now different American school districts and counting that have said they are no longer allowing teachers to test their own students. Because with Common Core, the testing is so onerous at the national level, they don't have time. And it's not fair to ask the kids to take other tests. So American school districts, we're over 50 now, have given up their ability to test their own kids, simply allowing their kids to take the national test as the only test they take. 50 different school districts. You see what I mean about loss of control? If 50 school districts have already foregone the right to test their own students, allowing only the federal government to do that, who's in charge? You get it, right? Whoever controls the tests controls the curriculum, don't they? Your teachers are going to have to teach to those tests. Oh, and by the way, over 30 states in the union have geared teacher evaluation exclusively to how the teachers perform on these tests. So this is why the unions are balking. Now, the primary way that most of America's teachers are going to be evaluated now in the public schools is the results of their kids on these tests. So you're a teacher, and you don't like this or that about Common Core. You don't think it works. So you decide you're going to do something else. You're not going to be able to do that, are you? Because that will never be tested. If the only thing your kids get tested on is Common Core, you know what your teachers are. Is that even, are there teachers here today? Is it even ethical To only gear your kids' in classroom performance to a test, that's not ethical. But that's what you've got now. Including rewriting the standards and revising the tests with teacher input. Didn't happen. How about the nation's second largest teachers union? How about the American Federation of Teachers? Now, and notice the date there. That's July of last year. The AFT, by the way, believe it or not, is actually considered the more progressive of the two unions. If the NEA isn't radically progressive enough for you, these are the guys for you. And I want you to hear what the AFT said in July. In a major surprise, the American Federation of Teachers, the country's second largest teachers union, opened its convention by announcing a step back from Common Core. The AFT will now provide monetary grants for teachers who want to criticize the standards or even write new ones, because teachers had no say in this. No meaningful say in this. So what a racket. If you're the AFT, you're charging union dues to all your teachers. Then you're going to give some of that union dues back to them. But that's a big thing. Because as I just said to you at the beginning of this, the problem we have is a huge number of teachers. I don't know what the percentage is. Right now you're told by your states, right, that all our teachers love Common Core. And what you hear from is the handful that really love it. I guarantee you, if we had some mechanism to protect the anonymity of our teachers, it would be shocking how high the opposition was, at least 50%. But that's not going to happen, right? So the AFT's taken it upon itself. See, this is what happens in states. If the state wants the standards and the state union wants the standards, what are teachers going to do? They shut up or they get fired. In states like these, in some states where I'll show you Chicago and New York, for instance, where the New York Teachers Union now has pulled out, that means that New York teachers can speak out now. And guess what? They're speaking out by the hundreds of thousands against this. Because if the state tries to fire them, the union has their back. In states like Wisconsin, right, where the union supports Common Core and the state supports it, surprise, surprise, there seems to be no teacher opposition to Common Core in Wisconsin, right? How about my personal favorite? How about President Obama's own backyard? How about the Chicago Teachers Union? This is the most progressive union in the country. These are the same folks. You know who their Martin Luther King Day speaker was last year for the elementary school kids? Jeremiah Wright. Remember the Reverend Jeremiah Wright? That's who it was. Again, that's Karen Lewis right there in the bottom right-hand corner. She was going to, she's got some kind of cancer now, she's ill. But she was going to run for mayor of Chicago. And get this, she was going to run to the left of Rahm Emanuel. I didn't think you could get anything but dryer lint to the left of Rahm Emanuel. Nevertheless, I want you to hear what Karen Lewis said about this. Notice the date, May of last year. Quote, all of this is a quote. I agree with educators, teachers, and parents from across the country. The Common Core mandate represents an overreach of federal power into personal privacy. This is all that data mining, which unfortunately we won't have time to say much about here. That's a whole nother 3 hours. But I want you to listen to who's telling you this. It's not me, right? Everything you've heard today, where's it coming from? An overreach of federal power into personal privacy, as well as an overreach of federal power into state educational autonomy. This woman is an avowed Marxist, and she's telling you the state is overstepping its bounds. What does that suggest to you? You think she's likely to overstate or understate the problem, right? How about this, quote, Common Core eliminates creativity in the classroom and it impedes collaboration. We have teachers here, right? You tell me if I'm wrong, ladies and gentlemen. Aren't there times when you have to throw the curriculum aside, you have to throw the textbook away? Aren't there times where you got 25 kids staring at you with deer in the headlight looks, not getting anything? The best teachers are the ones who have the freedom to create, to be creative, to be able to do what they need to do, because not all your kids are the same kid. Who thought it was a good idea to have one standard for 60 million kids? You've got one standard for 60 million kids. By definition, does that have to be a high standard or a low standard? You get it, right? Any standard that you're going to force every kid to is going to require, to be a fair standard, an accessible one, it has to be a lower standard, not a higher standard. We've had outcome-based education like this for 40 years. This isn't new. It's failed every time it's been tried. We know for a fact, the only thing that really guarantees a good education are three things. You need a committed mom and dad, a disciplined child, and an effective teacher. Studies show, and I'll show you some in a moment, every step away from that you get. America became a superpower on the backs of men and women who learned in one-room schoolhouses. And then in the 1980s, right, it all got kicked up from the classroom to the districts. Then a little bit later, in the 90s, from the districts to the states, officially. And then with No Child Left Behind to the federal government, and now Common Core. The farther you get away from allowing control to take place between the little triad there, the worse education becomes. And that I'll prove that to you momentarily as well. Every study we have shows that. Common Core is as far removed from allowing teachers, moms and dads and kids to impact education as you can possibly get, unless someday the United Nations was to take over education. And I gotta tell you, you may scoff at that, but look it up online. In 2004, you can find it online, Bill Gates signed a mutual agreement pact with the United Nations as a private citizen to begin impacting American education in the name of global interest. You find it online. 2 clicks of a mouse, you'll find it. There she is, right? It eliminates creativity in the classroom and impedes collaboration. How about this? We also know that high-stakes standardized testing is designed to rank and sort our children, and it contributes significantly to racial discrimination and the achievement gap in America's schools. And she's right. Do you know where the biggest point of agreement between the radical left and the radical right is on Common Core? What it does to special needs kids and to kids who are already suffering. Karen Lewis's schools are all inner city schools. Less money, more problems. They get hammered with things like Common Core. You're not going to pull those kids up. In fact, by including this one-size-fits-all standard, you will guarantee that all you will accomplish is pulling down achieving schools. I'll give you an example. Massachusetts is the only state in the union that if you pulled it out of the United States and measured it against the rest of the world in math and reading and science, it finishes in the top 5. Massachusetts, who had some of the highest standards in the world, took $240 million from Race to the Top, threw out their standards, and took Common Core, and already seeing those levels of excellence have already declined. Right? That's Karen Lewis. Not only did Karen Lewis say that, the entire Chicago Teachers Union crafted 30 different anti-Common Core pieces of legislation. I can't read you all of them, just a couple. Number 1. The CTU resolution declares that instructional and curriculum decisions should be in the hands of classroom professionals who understand the context and interests of their students. What a revolution! Let teachers and professors of education help shape the curriculum. It wasn't done. They should be in the hands of those people who understand the context and interests of their students. And, quote, the education of children should be grounded in developmentally appropriate practice. Yeah, that's Chicago telling you. The standards are not appropriate. It asks little kids to do things they cognitively can't do. It inserts things like really graphic sexuality into the curriculum via the textbooks and the pedagogy at remarkably young ages, which we shall see. There's all sorts of, and keep in mind, you got a problem with that, you take it up with Karen Lewis. The first person who used the word developmentally inappropriate is the whole Chicago's Teachers Union. How about this? Common Core standards were developed by non-practitioners, non-educators, including, who did it? Test and curriculum publishers. That's who did it. Think about this. And you tell me if I'm wrong. Nothing has changed in math in 1,000 years for kids from kindergarten to high school. Have we invented a new geometric shape I am unaware of? Did somebody insert a new number into the system? For kids in 5 years old to 18 years old, nothing has changed mathematically. You ought to be able to buy one textbook and keep it for 50 years. But the problem is, companies like Pearson, they don't make any money off that, do they? Have you noticed, since the 1970s, have you noticed that every 3 or 4 years now we throw everything out and start over again? That's by design. Because they got to keep selling you stuff to keep making money. Do you know who the second largest donor to Common Core is outside Bill Gates? Pearson Publishing. Pearson Publishing. Did you know that your federal government gave Pearson the exclusive contract to produce, manufacture, and grade the exams? Every test your kids take, Pearson gets $30 a head. What's 30 times 60 million? And by the way, the federal government did not do an open bid contract. They just handed that arrangement to Pearson. Right? That's what they're telling. So you know what you got here? This is the crony capitalism, right? Oh, by the way, people ask, well, Bill Gates, he's such a philanthropist. He does all this for nothing. Excuse me. It has been estimated that 70% of American school districts, 70, will have to upgrade their technology to be able to do the kind of exclusively computer-based tests Common Core mandates. Whose computers do you think are going in those schools? Do you think Apple got that contract? Right. And ask yourself, look, if this had been the Koch brothers, would it not be on the front page of the New York Times, right? Rogue billion, if it were the Koch brothers, Harry Reid's head would explode all over the Senate floor. So I simply ask, and he would be right to be upset. Why aren't we? Why are we? This is the thing that gets me. It is so obvious they told you what they're doing. I'll show you that too. How about this? Did you know that 1 week ago, the Democrat Party, the entire state Democrat Party in Washington state, a much more progressive state even than Minnesota, they voted unanimously to remove Common Core. The Democrat Party did. Here's what they said. The Central Committee of the and notice the date, this is January 24th of this year, 2015. The Central Committee of the Washington State Democratic Party has passed a resolution roundly condemning the Common Core standards. This is the first time a statewide Democratic Party committee has taken a public position against the standards. And it happened in the backyard of the Gates Foundation, which has provided the funding that made the national standards possible. This could signal a sea change for the beleaguered standards because up until now, political opposition has been strongest in the Republican Party. Washington State Democrat, and I'm going to read you some of their resolution because, again, they got the bona fides in this culture, right? They've got those shiny D's before their name, which means you can believe them, so the media tells us. Okay, I'm going to read you because everything I could say, everything anybody can say about Common Core, they said it in their resolution, so take their word for it. How about this? Whereas the copyrighted and therefore unchangeable Common Core state standards are a set of controversial, top-down K-12 academic standards that were promulgated by wealthy private interests without research-based evidence or validity and are developmentally inappropriate for the lowest grades, the youngest kids. And whereas, as a means of avoiding the U.S. Constitution, the U.S. Constitution's 10th Amendment prohibition against federal meddling in state education policy, two unaccountable private trade associations, the NGA and the CCSSO, have received millions of dollars in funding from the Gates Foundation to create the standards, and whereas the U.S. Department of Education improperly pressured state legislators into adopting the Common Core standards and the high-stakes testing based on them as a condition of competing for race-to-the-top money. And whereas, as implementation of Common Core will cost local school districts hundreds of millions of dollars to pay for standardized computer board tests, new technology, new curricula, and teacher training at a time when Washington is already insufficiently funding K-12 basic education. And whereas, therefore, be it resolved that we call upon the Washington State Legislature and the Superintendent of Public Instruction to withdraw from the Common Core state standards and keep K-12 education student-centered and accountable to the people of Washington State. That's shocking. How about this? I mentioned to you before, right? Who pays for all of this? You think Minnesota, you think states like Wisconsin, you think states like New York that took money from the Race to the Top program? They're giving you money, so we took the standards. Do you honestly believe the federal government's going to keep giving you that money in perpetuity? They're going to give it to you just as long as it takes to get you completely switched over. Then guess who's going to pay for it? I'll give example one. Notice the date, January 29th of this year, about a week ago, right? In the news, California. Districts seek reimbursement for Common Core test costs. The state of California could be liable for as much as $1 billion per year in costs if a group of school districts in California succeeds in winning reimbursement for expenses associated with the implementation of the computer-based tests. Already, the school districts in California are suing the state to pay for the tests, up to about $1 billion a year. The people of California are going to have to pay to simply be able to. You think that makes up for the 800? They got $800 million, California, one time. And now you're talking $1 billion a year just to keep up with the testing, right? Notice the date on that. It's from the same article. The districts contend that, unlike the old pencil and paper tests, the new computer board tests require districts to buy computers, expand their internet broadband, right? Install wireless connectivity, on and on and on. All those things are going to have to happen. Right? What's it going to cost you to be involved with this? And how about this? I mentioned this before. Notice the date on this, January 31st of this year, right? Illinois, Chicago, you saw what Chicago said. They refused to give those tests to but 10% of their kids. Oh, they insisted they will only subject 10%, Chicago, of their kids to those exams. And here's how your federal, but keep in mind, this isn't a federal program. Here's how your federal government responded last week. Chicago, quote, "Feds threatened to take away $1 billion in school funding from Illinois. Chicago Public Schools' decision to administer new Common Core student tests to only about 10% of the city's 600 schools could cost the state over $1 billion in federal aid." In a recent letter to Illinois School Superintendent Christopher Koch, from Assistant U.S. Education Secretary Deborah Delisle made it clear that the state could lose as much as $1.17 billion in federal education funding next year alone if Chicago doesn't comply with the Common Core testing mechanisms. Now, if this is state-led, shouldn't states be able to walk away? If it's state-led, shouldn't states be able to opt out of it? Your federal government is now twisting the arms. You can walk away, but not another penny from us. What kind of attitude towards education? And everything we've said so far, you do see, right? Not a lick, not an iota has anything to do with helping your kids get better at anything. This is about control, pure and simple, from top to bottom. All right, how about this? Don't listen to me. This is the thing. I don't understand why we're talking this way. Because if you just listen to the people who did this, they will tell you in their own words why they did it. And yet the politicians who support this, the high-ranking school administrators, the school board people who want this, they'll look you in the eye and lie to you. How many of you have heard the lie? They're just a set of standards, they're not curriculum. Oh, you've heard that? Well, listen to what Mr. Gates said back in 2009.
We'll only know if this effort has succeeded when the curriculum and tests are aligned to these standards. Secretary Arne Duncan recently announced that $350 million of the stimulus package will be used to create just these kinds of tests, next generation assessments aligned to the Common Core. When the tests are aligned to the common standards, the curriculum will line up as well.
And that happens, Minnesota, in the spring for you. Us, Wisconsin. In 40 different states, the first serious Common Core tests begin this spring. You heard what he said? How are you? You keep hearing this lie. We have local control. Our teachers will be able to adapt. Our teachers will be able. No! He told you that we'll only know if this is going to work when the tests and the curriculum line up. He who controls the tests controls what your teachers can teach. How's that local control working out for you? Oh, it gets even better than that. The man singularly responsible for these tests, the man singularly responsible for Common Core, the architect of Common Core, the man paid by Gates to put the committee together, he's called the architect of Common Core. His name is David Coleman, C-O-L-E-M-A-N. The Huffington Post calls him the most powerful educational administrator you've never heard of. Keep in mind that David Coleman has never in his life been a classroom teacher. He's the guy that was appointed to oversee this. And get this, no sooner did David Coleman oversee the writing of the Common Core standards than he immediately left Common Core, and miraculously, he became the CEO of the college boards, where the same man who wrote Common Core is now rewriting the SATs and the ACTs. You know, the exams your kids are going to have to take to get into college to conform to his standards. How does that happen? You don't even know who he is. He's never been elected to anything. He goes from being the chair, the architect of Common Core, to now conveniently the man who determines what your SATs are going to look like for your kids. And you think about this if you're homeschooling your kids. You think about this if you've got your kids in Common Core free private schools. Soon, they're going to have to start taking ACTs that are geared exclusively to the Common Core standards. That's by design, right? You see what I mean by takeover? Here's David Coleman. And how many of you have heard this, right? What we just said, our teachers have freedom, our teachers have latitude, we've got local control. I want you to listen to David Coleman. Here's what he said.
Which is teachers will teach towards the test. There is no force strong enough on this earth to prevent that. There's no amount of hand waving, there's no amount of saying they teach to the standards, not the test, we don't do that here, whatever.
He's proud of this. He's putting it in your face. Your teachers are going to teach to our tests. There's no power on earth that's going to prevent that. This is the guy responsible for Common Core primarily. Right? When they look you in the eye at your school and tell you we have local control, when they tell you our teachers will be able to overcome the worst aspects of this, the guy who created this has a different opinion. Okay, of course, your teachers haven't had their first tests yet. Your state hasn't really seen the consequence of these exams yet. It's coming. It's coming. How about this? We've had, in the last 40 years, we've had 50 different academic studies done, 50, on the relationship between state and federal standards to individual school performance. Do you know what all those tests have proven? All those surveys? All those academic studies? There's not a single link between standards at the state level or the federal level and how your kids perform in the classroom. Zero, zip, nada, none. In fact, the bigger you make the standard, from the district to the state, from the state to the feds, it has absolutely no impact. We're spending all this money, changing everything over, ceding all of this control to the federal government, and it doesn't change one thing in your kids' education. This is the Brown Center Report on American Education. It's published yearly, I believe, by the Brookings Institute, which is a left-leaning think tank. Here's the Brown Center Report. It's the most comprehensive study done so far on national standards. Here's what it says. I'm just going to read you the concluding paragraph. Because you type the Brown Center Report into your Google, you can read the whole, you could see all their data. Here's what they said, quote, "What effect will the Common Core have on national student achievement? The analysis presented here suggests very little impact. The quality of the Common Core standards are currently being hotly debated, but the quality of past curriculum standards has been unrelated to student achievement. The rigor of performance standards, how high the bar is set for proficiency, has also been unrelated to student achievement. The bigger the standards, the less they work. And at the state level, not just the federal level, but standards at the state level have no impact whatsoever. And there's data on this. It's good, researched academic data, 50 different studies in 40 years, and they all say the same thing. And yet, so what's going on here? This isn't about helping your kids. This is about determining who gets to teach them what. Let's talk briefly about the standards themselves. You need one last little history lesson, to show you the good faith of the Common Core people. David Coleman, after they put the standards together, after they wrote them, the Common Core Committee brought together an outside group into Washington, D.C. to validate the standards. They gave this committee, called the Validation Committee, they gave it absolute carte blanche to throw the standards out, to revise them, to write them over. They only brought, interestingly, one math expert and one English expert on the whole committee. The math professor, a retired professor, a fellow by the name of James Milgram. He is a retired Stanford math professor. Most of the math that got us to the moon in the 1960s is the math he did. He was the only mathematician on the committee. The only English professor on the committee was a woman by the name of Dr. Sandy Stotsky. a retired ELA specialist from University of Arkansas, considered to be the foremost ELA specialist in the country. These two experts, not only did they vote no on the standards, they said they should immediately be thrown in the garbage. Jim Milgram said about the math standards, and I quote, "It is an absolute joke to think that Common Core math is going to prepare your kids for college-level math or even for math in a two-year tech college." Sandy Stotsky said of the English language arts standards that they will set our kids 3 years behind the 3 years they're already behind the high-achieving readers in the world. They both voted no. They convinced other people on the committee to vote no. You know what the Common Core people did? They just wrote them out of the final document. They just erased all mention of them from their final document. That's why both Jim Milgram and Sandy Stotsky are touring the country doing what I'm doing, trying to warn people. I'm sure Sandy's been to your state to talk to people. Jim was, they're now, they just got back from North Dakota, the two of them, warning you about what's coming with them. As an English language arts person, this comes directly from Sandy. This makes sense to me as an English professor. Common Core mandates that 50% of the literature that your kids have read over the years has to be removed from English classes, and it is replaced with informational texts, many of which come directly from the federal government. As Dr. Stotsky says, what you're getting here, I should also point out to you, because just in case it matters, both lifelong Democrats, Stotsky and Milgram. No tinfoil hats in their closets. What do you get? What do you get with that? More indoctrination, because if kids are reading government stuff, one-sided government stuff, there's no debate discussion. Much more indoctrination within text. Literature's being pulled out. Why do we read stories in English class? When you put your kids to bed at night, you read them a story. But the purpose is to put them to sleep. So why do you read them stories that get their little hearts pumping and their little eyelashes fluttering? Because you intrinsically know that kids only learn how to read and learn to love reading by reading more and more complex things. But half that literature is being pulled out now. And when you read literature, when you read Shakespeare's Hamlet, or you read Jane Eyre by Bronte, you have no idea how Shakespeare would have voted on illegal immigration. You have no idea what Jane Eyre's attitude was to green energy. You talk about big issues: character, morality, ethics, justice, peace, war, truth. Now they're reading very tendentious politics. If you wanted to put your kids to bed at night and make them go to sleep, why wouldn't you read them a Bill Gates computer manual? It would do it, right? But that literature is being yanked out. And here, by the way, here are some of the informational texts your kids will be exposed to in high school. By the time your daughter is a freshman in high school, how about that? Recommended levels of insulation. A report released in 2010 by the EPA and the Department of Energy. Sandy estimates that about 35% of the informational texts that replace literature have to deal with man-made global warming. One-sided, it's happening, it's our fault, and it's America's problem. No counterbalance, no other article. How about the middle one, by the time your son's a 10th grader? President Obama's own executive orders from the White House. President Obama's Executive Order 13423, strengthening federal environmental, energy, and transportation management. Critical thinking is when you expose kids to multiple perspectives and you let them decide what they believe. This is one-sided propaganda. The long essay on the evolution of the grocery bag, spoiler alert in case you want to go home and read it, paper and plastic are both bad, and America's destroying the planet. And again, by the way, look, is there a place for climate exercises in school? Sure there is. I don't know why it's in English, though. I guarantee you in basic science, they're not reading Shakespeare, right? There's an agenda here. And then you've got this problem. As Sandy Stotsky says, hang on, let me go ahead and show you. There's Sandy. There's Sandy. Sandy says, we have to explore why so many of the exemplar texts in Common Core are radically sexualized. Why are they exposing your kids to really graphic stuff? I'll give you an example. This book is Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. Toni Morrison's a great writer. She's a Nobel Prize winner. But we wouldn't assign this book to freshmen in college. It's about a 12-year-old girl who's a victim of rape and incest. And in the course of the book, she comes to bond with her rapist and writes in shockingly graphic terms about the nature of their encounters. This book has been pulled out of Common Core textbooks for kids as young as 8th grade, middle schoolers. I have blocked out the bad words. You can't see them anyway. If you want to see what some of those passages say, you come up afterwards and I'll show you. It's probably better because we got some young ones here that you can't see them. Sandy estimates that there are 36 alone at the junior and senior level books, recommended exemplar texts for Common Core, that contain sexuality this graphic. And as she asks you, what's it doing there? Why did they do that? And it's not just for the older kids in the pedagogy that grew up around Common Core. You got examples like this, which was for an 8-year-old, a 3rd grader. And I can't even, it's too blurry, I can't read it. Short answer is, I'll send you the slide if you want to see it. It's an assignment where kids are sent home. It's a good assignment. They're sent home with a paragraph in English class. They have to read the paragraph, and they have to answer some questions about it. Sounds good until Common Core got a hold of it. This paragraph, which I can't, it's too fuzzy for me to make out, it's about a young mom who comes home, and she starts to make the bed, and she finds in the bed a hair clip that's not hers. One paragraph of graphic description later, and the 8-year-olds have to conclude, what is the topic of this paragraph? The right answer, Dad's having an adulterous affair in Mom's bed. If you go home and simply type in sexualized Common Core lessons in Google, you'll find 1,000 of these at every grade level, right? Obviously, the little kids aren't reading flat-out pornography, but some of the books like Dreaming in Cuban and Black Swan and The Bluest Eye, some of these books are pretty shocking, right? And as Sandy asks you, what do they do in there, all right? And then the math, Remember what Professor Milgram said? This is not serious math. In every high-achieving math country on earth, all of them, kids start serious algebra in 7th grade or even 6th grade. Under No Child Left Behind, our kids didn't start algebra till 8th grade. And under Common Core, serious algebra is pushed into high school, which means your kids will no longer have access to calculus and advanced math in high school. If you're not starting real algebra till 9th grade, you'll never get there. Many schools have already pulled calculus off the books. Schools in Florida are removing calculus from the books because your kids won't get there. Here is talking to Professor Milgram about this, right? He said, look at this video. As far as I can tell, he said, this is what Common Core math is about.
But even under the new Common Core, even if they said 3 times 4 was 11, if they were able to explain their reasoning and explain how they came up with their answer really in words and in oral explanations, and they showed it in the picture, but they just got the final number wrong, we're really more focusing on the how and the way.
And that's it. This is sociological math, he said. Milgram points, and by the way, let me give you a name. If you want to read Milgram and Stotsky, there's a website, it's free. It's called Pioneer Institute. They have published multiple white pages. You could read hundreds of pages of data analysis free online from Professor Milgram and Professor Stotsky about why this isn't going to work. They were in the room. They were hired by Common Core to evaluate this. Go to pioneerinstitute.com and you can read what they say about this, right? This is it. Think about it. Math is hard. This is what Milgram calls social justice math. It's not fair that most kids can't do math at a high level. I couldn't. It's probably why I entered the high finance world of English professor, because I was lousy at math. But so what? The world needs more than CPAs. The fact is that the Common Core math people do not think it's socially just, that some kids can really excel in math while others can't. So we've created a math curriculum that allows every kid to feel comfortable with a little bit of math, but nobody to get too far ahead. And then he directed me to this video. This is the mother in this video is a college math professor. She cannot help her 8-year-old, her 3rd grade, with her simple math homework. So she put the little girl at the whiteboard and had her work a typical Common Core math problem. Here is this video. You'll get a much better sense of what this is. Here's the difficult math problem. Add those 3 numbers, 1568, 1423, and
So what
680.
I want you to do is, can you solve that problem showing me the way that you learned how to solve it in school?
Okay.
And talk to me while you're solving it.
So we learned that a big square like this is 100. So we could make that 100 into a cube, which would make 1,000.
So a square is 100, and then a cube is 1,000.
So let's just say that's 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
And now we still have to do 500. Could make that into 5.
You notice, right, that nobody's adding anything? This is just what you have to do to get the first number on the board.
We have 60.
The lines are 10s, the dots equal 1s. So now you got to put the second number on.
For her birthday, she got 1,000. 23 more. The dots represent 1.
Okay.
So now we have to add all of these together. So you could make 1,000. All of these together is 400. Now you need 600 more. So now I'm going to write the numbers down. So we have 1,000 plus, well, let's just say 3,000 because we have 3.
You have to do it this way, by the way.
3,000
To get credit for the answer, you have to do it this way.
plus 100, 200, 300, 400. So now we can erase all these sheets and hundreds and tens and say. So we can just add, and that gives us a total of 3,763.
Now listen to this.
Okay. Now that problem you just solved took about 8 minutes.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's what we're doing in school. But at home, I'm taught how to stack, and we're not allowed to do stacking in school.
Common
That's why
Core
we have to
math
figure it out that way.
prohibits
Okay.
what you're about to see.
So I'm going to stack.
You are not
these
allowed
numbers,
to do
which
this.
is Way easy.
That's it. "30 seconds to do stacking math, 8 minutes to do the other way." And as Professor Milgram says, look, I get it. I get that some kids may be visual learners. Maybe some kids, like me, could have benefited from a different approach to teaching math. But then why do you get rid of and ban kids from doing it the intuitive way? There is no explanation for that. This is Jason Zimba, Z-I-M-B-A. He is the man most responsible for Common Core math. He's the guy who wrote the Common Core math standards. I want you to listen as on film he admits that Common Core math will not prepare your kids for college level math. The man who wrote the standards. Now, he's sitting there, he's being interviewed by Dr. Sandra Stotsky, whose voice you will hear, but whose face you won't. It's a short 30-second clip. I'm going to walk you through it. That's Jason Zimba on the right.
The definition of college readiness, I think it's a fair critique that it's a minimal definition of college readiness.
Okay, you heard what he said. She accuses Common Core math of not being college ready. And you just heard him say, I agree with you. It is a minimal definition of college ready. Okay, now listen a little further.
The definition of college readiness, I think it's a fair critique that it's a minimal definition of college readiness.
For some colleges.
Well, for the colleges most kids go to, but not that most parents probably aspire, right?
It's not for STEM. It's not for international
That's true. It's not only not for STEM, it's also
issue.
not for selective colleges that.
You heard what he said? Every time she criticizes him, he says the criticism is worse. STEM is math that will prepare kids for careers in science, technology, engineering, and math. Not only, he says, is his Common Core math curriculum not for STEM, it's not even for kids who want to attend a 4-year comprehensive university. I won't stop at this time. It's only a little bit longer. But again, this is why I ask you, why are we talking about this? In your newspapers, I'm speaking in Duluth tomorrow. And prior to me going down to Duluth, they wrote a little article about us coming and said, expect biased and prejudiced information. None of it's even my information, right? This is what, and your newspapers are complicit in this, right? Just watch this, I won't interrupt it again.
The definition of college readiness, I think it's a fair critique that it's a minimal definition of college readiness.
For some colleges.
Well, for the colleges most kids go to, but not that most parents probably aspire, right?
It's not for STEM. It's not for international
That's true. It's not only not for STEM, it's also not for selective colleges that, for example, UC Berkeley, even whether you're going to be an engineer or not, you'd better have pre-calculus
Right.
to get
But
into
we
UC
have to think
Berkeley,
of our
right?
engineering colleges.
And that's
scientific
true. I think the
education.
third pathway goes
All right.
goes a lot
Now listen
towards
to her
that. But
question.
your issue is really broader than that.
Oh, yes.
So I just wanted to make
Right
sure
here.
that we got that
I'm
out.
not just thinking of selective colleges. There's a much broader question here.
That's right. It's both, I think, in the sense of being clear about what this college readiness does and doesn't get you,
Right here.
and that's the big subject.
But
Doesn't
not to call something college ready when it only applies to a certain kind of college and a certain lower level of mathematical expertise that won't buy you far on the international market in most major disciplines of technology, economics, business, and so on.
And all he can do is shake his head yes. This is the guy who wrote the standard. Right? Again, why are we debating this? I'm almost done. I'm just about done. I want to show you one more. This is a second grade Common Core math problem. Notice the math problem. Tell how to make 10 when adding 8 plus 5. The little boy answered the way I did. Maybe I'm better than math than I thought I was. The little boy answered, you cannot make 10 with 8 plus 5. He gets it marked wrong by the teacher, and here's the explanation. Here's your Common Core explanation. Yes, you can. Take 2 from 5 and add it to 8. 8 plus 2 equals 10, then add 3. Does that make any sense to you? And if by typing sexualized Common Core lessons into Google, you get 1,000, you type in goofy Common Core math into Google, you're going to be reading for the rest of your life. Thousands and thousands of entries. All right? Then this is an interesting one, but I can't read it, so I'm going to skip it. And I'm going to close with this. Well, one more slide after this. As you sit here right now, there are 27 American school districts. There's probably more, I just haven't found them yet. 27 American school districts who are threatening moms and dads not to let their kids do any other math than in the classroom. This is the entire Irvine Unified School District from Orange County, California. What happened? Remember what Milgram said, this is sociology, it's not education, right? It's not, this is social justice. And now, look, we've gotten this far now that I'm almost done. You've listened to me for a little over an hour. You can decide for yourself whether you think I'm credible or not. But I couldn't have said this earlier, I'm gonna say it now. This kind of junk, for lack of a better word, this is socialism. This is guaranteeing every kid is the same kid, not letting any kid be unique or different. This is one size. You remember the old Soviet Union, right? It doesn't matter what your talents are, your aptitudes are. It doesn't matter how hard you work or what your attitude is. All that matters is when you're done, you're going to all be in the same place. That, my friends, is socialism. Here's an example of it. Moms and dads in California were freaking out because their 4th and 5th graders could not do any addition or subtraction in their head. You know, right, that Common Core prohibits the memorization of multiplication tables. All that foundational knowledge is verboten. You are not allowed, you have to work it all with pictures, right? And so moms and dads freaked out, started hiring tutors and have their kids work on math to get ahead. The school freaked out and warned and threatened the moms and dads. This comes right from the website. Quote, the warning, the links on this page are intended to support the classroom instruction that your child receives from his teacher. It is not appropriate to go ahead of the classroom instruction or to use this site to have your child work on math that is intended for use in subsequent grades. Here's the threat. Your child's math instruction and math placement will not change as a result of working ahead. This means that your child will continue to work in the grade level appropriate math regardless of any work that is done and submitted. No one's getting ahead anymore. Your kid in 3rd grade might be ready for geometry. Your 7th grader might be ready for trig. They're going to stay with the 7th graders because that's social justice. And that's how you get every kid to the same place. As I began by telling you, if you're going to get 60 million American kids to get the same math scores, it's not going to be a very high math score. People like me will be pulling them down. And there are a lot more me's out there than there are little Einsteins. That's just the way it is. Well, he failed math too, didn't he? So there you go. All right, the only last thing I want to show you then is this. I saved this to the end. This is the second part of the Common Core copyright. I purposely withheld it. I want to show it to you now. I want to show you the length that the Common Core people went to indemnify themselves from the damage that's going to be done to your kids. And I've talked to multiple lawyers about this. You don't write up a contract like this if your hands aren't dirty. Here's the second part of the Common Core copyright. Remember, the copyright is not held by anybody you can vote out. The copyright is not held by anybody. If your kids suffer under this, there's nothing you can do to get at these people. Think about that for a second and ask yourself, are we still a free constitutional republic? Here's the indemnification in the second half of the copyright. Under no circumstances shall the NGA Center or the CCSSO, individually or jointly, be liable for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, exemplary, consequential, or punitive damages, however caused, on any legal theory of liability, whether for contract, tort, strict liability, or a combination thereof, arising in any way out of the use of the Common Core state standards, even if the Common Core people are advised of the possibility of such dangers beforehand. Whatever damage your kids suffer from this, and we've got kids, the psychiatric wards for kids, middle school, elementary school kids, we've got kids burning themselves with cigarettes. If I had more time, I'd show you a 6-minute video from a clinical psychiatrist in New York State whose practice blew up when Common Core got there. Kids were hurting themselves, vomiting, being put on psychotropic medication just to get them to go to school. If you want to type in a name to watch the video, you type in the name Dr. Mary Calamia, Calamia. You can watch her entire testimony before the New York Senate Select Committee. Who creates an education paradigm for toddlers? Who puts together an education set of standards for little kids that has to go to this length to tell you that whatever damage is done to your kids because of what we've done, even if you tell us about it, you can't sue us? That's sick. There's so much more to talk about, but you've got many things to do, and I've taken time from you already. Thank you very much for being here.